play in that. Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, I'm going to read that, just reintroduce that verse again last week because some of you weren't here and some of you may not have been paying attention. So we'll go back over it. It says in verse 13, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men." And so we mentioned last week that to be salty is to be like Christ and to live out his life. It's to live out the Beatitudes. The words were written down in order for a purpose. Jesus was just showing us, had just went through the Beatitudes and told us what we're, as Christians, are to be like. And being salty is living out these Beatitudes. If we live out these Beatitudes, we will be the salt of the earth. And as we live out Christ's life in us, we help those around us develop a taste for Jesus. We looked at last week again some of the reasons. There's many of them, but some of the ways that salt, that the Christian life, what Jesus may have meant here when he said we're the salt of the earth. But one of the things we looked at was that salt is an antiseptic. They used it in those days to be as an antiseptic. And that's the way we're to be to the world today. We're to apply the salt. The world is sick. They have putrefying sores. We need to apply the salt. Even though that salt may burn and they may react and pull back, we need to apply the salt. God's left us here for a purpose, for an antiseptic to a dying world. And then also we also looked at that one of the recent ways that salt is used is to, and maybe probably what Jesus is referring to here, is that salt was used to flavor food. And so we're to try to, it's our duty to help those around us to develop a taste for Jesus. Used this illustration last week. A young salesman was disappointed about losing a big sale. And as he talked with the sales manager, he lamented to the sales manager, he said, "I guess it just proves you can lead a horse to the water, but you can't make him drink." And the manager replied, "Son, take my advice. Your job is not to make him drink. Your job is to make him thirsty." And so we asked the question, are you making anyone in your life thirsty to know more about Jesus Christ? Is there anyone who's curious enough about your life because you showcase Jesus in your life, that it would draw them to Jesus? Your life should convey such a flavor that it creates in others a hunger and a thirst for the gospel. And again, some people put salt on watermelon or tomatoes, but yet I've never heard such a person say, "Oh, that's great salt." No, they'll say that's great watermelon, that's a great tomato, but they don't say that's great salt. And the reason, because that is the job of the salt is not to make you think how great the salt is, but how great the salted food is. So we need to sprinkle salt all over our society. But tragically, we withdrawn from our society. We withdrawn from the culture. We turn our society over to the unrighteous to rule. We say, "Well, I don't want to get involved with politics in the government because it's so corrupt." But yet we apply ourselves there. We need to be in there. If not, only the unrighteous are there to make unrighteous decisions. The righteous need to be there to help make righteous decisions. We need to be in the schools and be involved in the schools and be involved in our work and where we are to be part of the culture, not act like that culture act, but to at least be there and to be salt in this unrighteous world. So when Christians pull out of public education, politics, and media, then righteous decisions are left to be made by unrighteous people, and they'll never be made. We've been called to penetrate our society, and again, when the question begs to be answered: how are your kids' schools different because you're there, because you're around? How's your local government different because you're around? How's the taste of your society and community different because you're around? And so we need to give the world a taste and a glimpse of who Jesus Christ is. We need to live out who we are in doing so. and that will give them a taste of who Christ is. Brought at this point last week too. Unfortunately, the church of today has a tendency to brag about how big the salt shaker is, but we're not. The attention shouldn't be on the salt shaker, our church buildings, or the amount of salt we can put into our shakers, our worship attendants, for example. Rather, our emphasis should be truly on salting down our communities with the good news and the good works of Jesus Christ. But so many times, all we're interested in getting the church building full instead of getting the salt out. And so the whole point of salt is to leave the shaker and to hit the meat, to hit the food. We need to impact our world with the life of Christ and to give the world again a taste of who Christ is. And so this requires us to recognize our value and to recognize and to fulfill our calling. As we mentioned last week, salt was considered very valuable in that day, and even the Roman soldiers many times were paid in salt. And so the question was last week, are we worth our salt? Are we worth our salt? And so in this section, though, as we're going to look at today, Jesus declares to us that we are called to shine the light of Christ. He begins by stating here in verse 14, you are the light of the world. And many times today, people get disturbed because the world seems to be so dark. And the reason the world is so dark because the world of culture, that's not where the light is. What else can a sinful place be but dark? Because sinfulness is the opposite of the light. Dark's opposite of light. Sinfulness. If God is sinless, which he is, and sin is and he represents light, and sin represents evil, and evil represents darkness, then we see why the world is so dark. So again, the world is lost and without any direction because the world is not light. Jesus is the light, and we're to reflect Jesus into the world. We're to bring the light into the world. Now, Jesus is the light, but we're to reflect that light. Jesus, as he lives in us, should be seen in us. And as a disciple of Jesus Christ, it's not enough to have a private, personal holiness. We must also have a public exposure. People ought to be able to see the light in us. It's not enough to just have Jesus in us just for ourselves. He didn't leave us here just for that. If he was wanting to do that, he could just saved us, took us home. But he left us here to be a light to the world. And to be a light, we had to have public exposure. If we're to go into a building, let's take this building for example. Now it's a little small. You can picture a bigger one in your mind if you want to. But suppose all the lights, we had a storm. And, I went to Jimmy Steele's one night after a storm and the power was off. And when I walked out the door, I parked in his driveway. I couldn't even see my car. It was so dark out there with the clouds and all, and no lights on. So suppose that happened here, and it was dark like that. No street lights outside to shine through the window, no moonlight, no lights here. The emergency lights weren't working, no lights whatsoever. And we had to flee out of here. Well, you can imagine, now many of us have been here long enough to pretty much have it memorized where we had to go, but you don't know who you're going to be running into, and you're trying to get out the door, and some people walk slower than others, and some are trying to hold on, trying to find out where they're going. And you can imagine the chaos if we had to get out of this door in pitch black darkness. And again, it'd be chaos as we run into chairs and walls and pews and each other trying to get out of the building. But if in the middle of the confusion, I'm going to use myself for example, since I'm up here, if I stood on this platform and I pulled out a huge flashlight and turned it on, well then guess what? I can now help guide the show, so to speak. Whoever has the light calls the shots when it's dark. And that dark building describes this world pretty well. People are crashing into everything. Everything seems to be falling apart, trying to find a way out of darkness. And we Christians are here to be the light. The tragedy is that we're not using the flashlight that God has given us. not being the light that God given us to give to the world, to shine some light into this world. So Christians, we need to turn that light on. Turn that. If you want to look at it as a flashlight or a floodlight or whatever, however you want to look at it, we need to turn that light on so people can see the darkness. And that's what Jesus has left us here to do. You are the light of the world. And after you turn it on, we need to hold it up high so everyone can see it. Christianity is not a cover operation where it's not like the CIA and some of these other spy agencies where they try to do everything in the dark. And no, when one of the things they emphasized in the military when we were on maneuvers, keep the lights down. You didn't want to be seen at night. You didn't light a cigarette in the night. You didn't shine a flashlight unless it had a shield on it, and then just on you only when you needed to. That was to keep the light down, but we're not to operate that way. Jesus wants us to be a light in a dark world. We don't go slinking around in the dark to get our work done. There's no room for a secret agent Christian. And so what we need is a group of people who are unapologetically Christian. We don't need to apologize for being a Christian. No one else is apologizing. The homosexuals, they're not apologizing. Maria just mentioned last night, have you noticed how many of the commercials are showing gay families, or whatever you want to call them? It's on Campbell soup, it's on candy commercials, it's on what is it? Tylenol. I'm not sure if I saw the Tylenol. Maybe it's a good thing I don't see it. But they're not apologizing. Racists aren't apologizing. If they can go public, so can Christians. Daniel was telling me a while ago that the coach for Charleston Southern, after they lost the playoff game the other day, but he took his players, went to the middle field. ESPN and all was watching. He took his player, and then there in the middle field, they circled up and they had prayer. And listen, Christians, if we don't push back and not just doing it to be seen, but displaying the light in this dark world, we're going to lose all our freedom. Praise God to see some schools pushing back. They're not going to have the transgender restrooms where your kids have to go in there with who knows who, and they're pushing back, and they're winning these cases. So many of the coaches are still taking their players out on the fields and being a light in this dark world. And we need to stand with them and be part of that also. If the evil world can do that, can go public, so can we. And after making this general assertion that Jesus did here, where he says we're the light of the world, he goes on and says, he shares two parables in verses 14 and 15. First, he says, a city cannot be hid. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. And in Jesus' day, cities were set on a hill for a number of reasons. One, it was cooler on a hill in that arid Middle Eastern land, Mideast land. The only air conditioning they had was when the breeze came through. And so cities were set on a hill so that they would get that breeze. Also, cities were situated on hilltops for protection against attack. It's harder to run uphill to attack a city than it is to run downhill. But Jesus' point, it's not a city's defense here, but its visibility, because it's on an elevated position. Most cities in Jesus' day were constructed largely in white limestone, and they were placed on a hilltop and to reflect the bright sun rays and allowing visibility for miles around. They didn't have the neon signs. Well, this was their neon signs. The city was a sign, so to speak. At night, the white marble mirrored both the moonlight and the burning lamps, and so travelers it was like a beacon for travelers going toward that city. And similarly, as disciples, our light ought to make it easier for people to find their way to God, just as that city is set on the hill. We're to live our life, our lights to be set up. We're to be set up so that people can find their way to God, to be that beacon to God. We're a city set on a hill that should be elevated and easily visible. And so, again, there's no place for undercover Christian in this world. We should give hope and direction for weary pilgrims in this dangerous and futile world. We need to give the world a taste, as we saw with the salt, of who Christ is, and we need to give them a glimpse of who Christ is. Then, now in verse 15, he goes on to say, neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. And of course, in Jesus' days, the King James here uses candlesticks, but in those days, in that Middle East culture, they didn't really use candles. That was really a not the way what they used were lamps. The homes were lit by small clay lamps, which could be held in the palm of the hand. And these clay lamps were sometimes covered with a hole in the top to which you pour the oil in. Then it had a hole in the side for a wick, and then that's what they used for the light. And since most Jewish homes were modest one-room structures, placing a lamp on a lampstand could give light to everyone in the house. So they would light the lamp, and then they wouldn't cover it up with a basket. They'd put it up on that lampstand so everyone could see. And so Jesus contrasts elevating a lamp on a lampstand to covering a lamp with a basket. People don't light a lamp to hide its light under a basket, Jesus said. As a matter of fact, just the thought of that is silly. It's not people light a lamp in order to shed light to everyone in the house. And so it's not that the people should not hide their... What Jesus was really emphasizing here, he's saying it's not that people should not hide their lights in their baskets, but they do not do this. And they don't do it because it would be foolish to do so. Lamps were essential for finding one's way for finding one's way when you're in a closed area during the night. And so the only time they put a basket on top of a lamp was to smother it, to cover it up, to put it out. And so we're not to put our light out, we're to let our light shine. So, but yet many of us extinguish our lamp when we go to work, go to school, go to neighborhood, go into our community. We don't want people to think we're fanatical Christians. So we cover up our lights and we put our light out. And Jesus is saying that's just foolish thinking. We assume we need to blend in rather than being a bright light. And so, but in these two parables, Jesus says, heat it up, or light it up, and lift it up. Give the world a taste, and again, a glimpse of who Christ is. And then Jesus concludes his passage with a powerful statement. He says, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. This is the reason we're to let our light shine. This verse is a command. It's not a suggestion. He's not saying, it'd be a good idea if you go let your light shine, church. No, he's not saying that at all. He's saying, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Jesus says, since you are a light, shine. That's what light does. It shines. And we're not here to get used to the dark, as one of Angela's songs speaks about. We're not here to get used to the dark, but we're here to shine as lights. And the light of Christ is to shine in and through us before all men. And in other words, this is a public exhibition of light. It's important to notice that the light is not equated with good works. There's a place for good works. We should live our life so that when light is seen out of our lamps, it should not surprise people that it does so. But here the light. But again, it's not here. It's not the light that's equated with good works. Rather, the light illumines the good works in such a way that men notice them and glorify God. What is it that lights up our works to the glory of God? I believe it's our verbal testimony to Jesus Christ. Good works by themselves are not light. Good works makes our light believable, but good works are not the light. They must be illuminated by words that direct attention and tribute to the Lord Jesus Christ. This is very, very important. In the book of Genesis, it says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And God said, let there be light. The words He said brought forth the light. And so we need, the point I'm trying to get is we need to verbally get the word out to Jesus Christ to be this light. It's good works, again, good works by themselves are not light. Let me get up. Sometimes Christians place a false distinction between words and deeds. They will say, I testify to my faith in God by the way I live. And others will say defiantly, I don't have to say anything. My life just displays that I'm a Christian. Well, it should not surprise, your life should be lived such a way that it doesn't surprise you, that surprise people when you tell them about Jesus Christ and that you're a Christian. But if you don't tell them how to become a Christian, you have not shed the light. And so you've got to tell them how to be a Christian. The idea that we shouldn't feel compelled to bring up the name of Jesus Christ as the explanation for our Christian character is born from either unbelievable arrogance or incredible naiveness. Our lives are not adequate or not an adequate witness apart from our words. We need to listen. That doesn't mean you have to speak everything, but people have to know how to be a Christian. Someone has to tell them how to be a Christian. Live that godly life. But tell people about Jesus Christ. If not, you're not being the light. And so whether you giving out tracts, whether you're giving out Gideon Bibles, whether you give out the devotions that I put back there, I don't care how you do it. You say it, write it, but somehow you got to get the gospel to them to be the light. If you have your most spiritual day and your good works are clearly evident, your co-workers and classmates may just assume that you're a good Mormon. And that's not enough. If you need to name the name of Christ, but if you name the name of Christ, people will know who you are, and they'll know where your works come from. But you got to tell them. And so Jesus expects good works, and He expects good words also. Both are necessary to glorify God. I think so many times we're trying to live a good moral life, but many unsaved people live good moral lives. Our job is to be a light and to get the good news to Jesus Christ out to the world. And then He says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. That word glorify means to show off. That's right. We're supposed to show God off. But unfortunately, many times it's tempting to dazzle others with our good works so that we're glorified and not God. We want people to talk good about us. We need to tell them about God so that He's glorified. Light functions best sometimes when it's, well, let me just say it this way. Sometimes we can do something to bring so much, you can turn on a light so bright that it blinds people. They can't see, they're having to shut their eyes. Sometimes by our trying to live out this super Christian life, that we're blinding people to the truth. We're just showing a bunch of actions, but not giving them the reason for our life, and so it makes it hard for them to see. And so Jesus makes it clear that our good works should not direct attention back to us, but to the Father which is in heaven. And the purpose of shining our light is to point others to God, who's working in us. When you look at the moon, no one looks at the moon and says, "Man, that's a wonderful moon, and it's such a powerhouse of light energy for us." Well, if you know anything about science whatsoever, you know that the moon of itself doesn't have any light-producing capability. It's not a light; it's a planet, a small orb anyway, and all it's doing is reflecting the light of the sun. And so So the moon has no light of its own. It merely reflects the light of the sun. And that's how it works with Christians too. The world sees our works but glorifies not us, but the one who's the true source of the goodness that we exhibit in our behavior. You could say we are like a stained glass window. We sparkle and shine when the sun is out, but in the darkness, you can't. A stained glass window is not it doesn't have the beauty at the night that it does in the daylight, because it has to have the light to shine through it to make it beautiful. And so, you still may be thinking, well, I'm just not very impressive, and I don't have a lot of gifts or talents, and I'm not educated, and I'm not rich, and I'm not outgoing, and I'm not even good looking, and how can God use me? And I want you to remember who God used to be the light bearers there in the early church age. His disciples, remember, Jesus' disciples were the little people of the world. Jesus himself was a carpenter by trade, a preacher who was not much older than 30. His disciples were close to the same age. They weren't political leaders. They weren't well educated. Some spoke with country accents. They didn't come from wealthy or aristocratic families. They came from what we would call today maybe small business and blue-collar jobs. So if Jesus would call his disciples at that day the salt of the earth and the light of the world, he can say the same to you and me today. So we need to give the world a taste and a glimpse of who Christ is. In my laundry room, I just noticed the other day, one of my lights, one of my bulbs has gone out, and they came to work on the plumbing the other day, and I saw that, and I noticed that light was out, and it wasn't as bright in there as it normally is, and so they had to come back this past week, and after I turned the light back on so they could see, and I hadn't got around to change that light bulb, and so the results. It remains dim in that laundry room. And so I have the light bulb, I just need to use it, and I need to put it in. And maybe this story describes your spiritual life. You're the light of the world, but you're not lighting up your world. Your life doesn't shed light, it casts shadows. Someone once phrased the issue this way: if you were tried for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? For many of us, this is a very sobering question. This week, you may see your next-door neighbor, or your mail delivery person, or your children's friends, or parents, or teachers, or co-workers. You may go to the restaurant, and you'll see these people. Jesus is saying to us, when we go there, let your light shine. Shine your light. Give the world a taste and a glimpse of who Christ is, and let those around you know that you're a disciple of Jesus Christ, and then show them off to those in your life. And I'm going to say one final thing in closing. He said that people do not light a candlestick and put it under a bush, but put it on a candlestick or a lamp. Don't light their lamp and put it under a bush. They put their lamps on a lampstand. And the church is referred to as being the lampstand. And as we put now it's one thing to put one lamp on a lampstand and let the light shine. But when we put our lamps together on the lampstand and shine and let it shine, then you see how much more light that gives, and how much more brightly that it gives. And so the churches the lamps need to be involved with the church, being placed on that lampstand. And so it just emphasizes again the importance of the church. And I know that we have a hymn picked out, but we're not going to sing that hymn. We're going to sing a very simple one. And Miss Angie, I don't even know if it's in the book, so we don't necessarily have to have it. But let's stand, and we're just going to sing this little chorus. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine.